March 26, 1945. The war in Europe is technically won. The German army is collapsing. The Third Reich is breathing its final, ragged breaths. But inside the headquarters of the United States Third Army, General George S. Patton is not celebrating. He is pacing. He is staring at a map. And he is about to make a decision that will get 300 of his own men killed or captured in a mission that has absolutely zero strategic value. He is about to order a raid 60 miles behind enemy lines, through the teeth of retreating German Panzer divisions, to a place that doesn't matter to the war effort. Why? Because inside a prisoner of war camp called Oflag XIII-B sits a lieutenant colonel named John Waters. And John Waters isn't just an American officer. He is George Patton's son-in-law. This is the story of Task Force Baum. It is the story of the Hammelburg Raid. It is the only battle of World War II that George Patton tried to hide from history books, the only time old blood and guts let his ego override his duty, and the only time he sent men to die for a personal favor. To understand the disaster, you first have to understand the man. By March 1945, Patton was a legend. He had raced across France, relieved Bastogne, and smashed the German army in the Palatinate. He believed he was invincible. He believed his Third Army could do anything. But beneath the ivory-handled pistols and the polished helmet, Patton was a man obsessed with destiny and legacy. He was terrified that the war would end before he could fulfill a promise he made to his daughter, Beatrice, known to the family as Little B. Her husband, John Waters, had been captured in Tunisia back in 1943 at the Battle of Sidi Bouzid. For 2 years, he had been a prisoner of the Reich, moved from camp to camp, starving, waiting. Patton felt a personal responsibility for this. He felt that his family honor was tied to liberating Waters personally. Now, intelligence reports landed on Patton's desk showing that Oflag XIII-B was located near the town of Hammelburg, just 60 miles east of the American lines. 60 miles is a long way in enemy territory. It means driving through layers of German defenses, exposing your flanks, and risking encirclement. Any rational commander would wait. The lines were moving fast. The Third Army would overrun Hammelburg in a week, maybe 10 days. There was no need to rush. But patience was not a virtue George Patton possessed. He was hearing rumors, whispers from the front, that the Germans were moving POWs deeper into the interior as the Allies advanced. He convinced himself that if he didn't act now, Waters would disappear into the Bavarian Alps forever. On the night of March 26th, Patton summoned his corps commander, General Mantonetti, and the commander of the 4th Armored Division, General William Hoge. He gave them an order that stunned them. He wanted a task force to break through the German lines immediately, drive to Hammelburg, liberate the camp, and bring the prisoners back. Both generals protested. They were seasoned commanders. They looked at the map and saw a death trap. They told Patton it was suicide. They told him that sending a small column that deep into enemy territory without infantry support was a death sentence. They argued that the risk was too high for a mission that had no tactical purpose. Patton didn't care. He lied to them. He told them he feared the Germans were going to massacre the prisoners at Hammelburg. He claimed he had secret intelligence that the SS was preparing to execute the American officers. This was false. There was no such intelligence. It was a fabrication to justify the mission. When General Hoge continued to push back, Patton's voice turned to ice. He told them to execute the order or he would find commanders who would. The order went down the chain of command until it reached a 23-year-old captain named Abraham Baum. Baum was a battle-hardened tanker, a man who had fought from Normandy to the Rhine. He was tough, smart, and respected by his men. He was also Jewish, which added a layer of grim irony to sending him deep into Nazi Germany. When he was called into headquarters and shown the map, he thought it was a joke. "You want me to do what?" Baum asked. The mission parameters were insane. He was given 300 men, 16 Sherman tanks, 28 half-tracks, and 3 self-propelled guns. That was it. No air support. No artillery support once they passed the line of departure. And the route wasn't a straight shot. It was a winding path through villages infested with German anti-tank teams, past the training grounds of enemy panzer units. Baum was told he had a 50-50 chance of getting back. In reality, he had almost zero. But orders were orders. On the evening of March 26th, the engines of Task Force Baum roared to life. The men checked their weapons. They loaded extra ammunition. They strapped jerry cans of gasoline to the backs of their tanks because they knew they wouldn't have enough fuel to make the round trip without refueling. They looked at each other with the grim realization of veterans who know they are being sent into a meat grinder. At 5 p.m., under the cover of a heavy artillery barrage, Task Force Baum crossed the line. The violence was immediate. They smashed through the German front line at the town of Schweinheim. Sherman tanks blasted holes in buildings. Machine guns cut down German infantry who tried to fire Panzerfausts. It was brute force, pure and simple. They broke into the open country, but now the clock was ticking. The Germans knew they were there. A column of American armor 60 miles deep in Germany doesn't go unnoticed. German observation posts radioed the position. The Luftwaffe, though crippled, scrambled night fighters. German local commanders began mobilizing everything they had to cut the road behind Baum. The task force drove through the night. It was a chaotic, running gunfight. In every village they passed, windows opened and RPGs flew out. In the town of Gemünden, they ran into a German convoy. Baum didn't stop. He ordered his tanks to crush the German trucks, run them off the road, and keep moving. Speed was their only armor. If they stopped, they died. The psychological strain on the men was immense. They were operating on zero sleep. The drivers were fighting to keep their eyes open, steering 30-ton machines through narrow, winding roads in pitch darkness. Every shadow looked like an ambush. Every turn could hide an 88mm gun. By the time they reached the town of Law, they had already lost several vehicles. But Baum pushed them harder. "Keep moving," he screamed over the radio. "Don't stop for anything." They crossed the main river bridge just moments before German engineers could blow it. It was luck, pure and simple. But luck runs out. By dawn on March 27th, Task Force Baum was battered, exhausted, but they were close. They had fought through 60 miles of hell. They had lost tanks to Panzerfausts. They had lost men to sniper fire. But on the horizon, they saw the barbed wire fences of Oflag XIII-B inside the camp. The prisoners heard the rumble of engines. At first, they thought it was German tanks moving to the front. The prisoners were in a sorry state. Oflag XIII-B was an officers' camp, holding over 1,500 men, mostly Serbian officers from the Royal Yugoslav Army and American officers captured in North Africa and the Battle of the Bulge. They were emaciated, surviving on watery soup and sawdust bread. When the sound of the engines grew louder, the Serbian prisoners in the neighboring compound began to cheer. Then came the distinctive crack of American 76mm guns blasting the guard towers. Then they saw the white stars on the green armor. Chaos erupted in the camp. The German guards, realizing they were outgunned, began to flee or surrender. The American officers, starving and gaunt, rushed to the fences. Among them was Lieutenant Colonel John Waters. He was limping, using a cane, having been wounded in Tunisia. He couldn't believe his eyes. Patton had actually come for him. But the liberation was not the happy ending Patton had imagined. It was the beginning of the end. Captain Baum rolled his tank up to the gate. He was bleeding from a knee injury. His face was black with soot and grease. He looked at the thousands of prisoners and realized the math didn't work. He had 28 half-tracks. He could carry maybe 200 men tops. There were 1,500 American officers in the camp. He couldn't take them all. He had to tell the ranking American officer, Colonel Good, the hard truth. "I can only take a few," Baum said. "The rest of you have to walk or stay behind." The camp turned from jubilation to despair in seconds. While they were arguing about who would go, disaster struck. John Waters, along with a German officer, tried to walk out of the camp under a white flag to negotiate the surrender of the guard garrison. A German soldier, confused or fanatical, didn't see the white flag. He fired a single shot. John Waters was hit in the hip and fell to the ground, critically wounded. The man Patton had sent 300 men to rescue was now bleeding out in the dirt, unable to be moved. Captain Baum had to make a decision. He couldn't evacuate Waters. Waters was too injured to survive the rough ride in a tank. He couldn't take all the prisoners. And his scouts were reporting that German forces were closing in from all sides. The raid had stirred up a hornet's nest. Elements of a German tank destroyer battalion and Tiger tanks from a nearby Panzer training unit were moving in. German infantry was setting up ambushes on the escape route. The element of surprise was gone. Baum ordered the task force to mount up. They loaded as many prisoners as they could on the backs of the tanks, clinging to the hulls like barnacles. They turned around to fight their way home. But the way home was closed. The Germans had blown the bridges. They had set up roadblocks with 88mm anti-tank guns. Task Force Baum was trapped. They tried to move west, but ran into heavy fire. They tried to move north, but the road was blocked. The sun went down on March 27th, and the task force was running on fumes. The jerry cans were empty. The ammunition racks were almost bare. They had nowhere to go. Baum ordered them to pull back to a small hill, Hill 427, to form a defensive perimeter. It was their Alamo. Under the light of German flares, the final battle began. It wasn't a battle. It was a massacre. German Tiger tanks, superior in armor and firepower, hunted the Shermans in the dark. One by one, the American tanks were hit. They exploded, lighting up the night. The half-tracks were shredded by machine gun fire. The prisoners who had climbed aboard for a ride to freedom were cut down. The screaming of wounded men filled the night air. Captain Baum, realizing the situation was hopeless, gave the order to every man for himself. "Get out," he told them. "The mission is over. Try to make it back to the lines on foot." The task force dissolved. Men scattered into the woods. Baum himself was shot in the groin. He crawled into a ditch, bleeding, exhausted, his mission a failure. He lay there in the mud, listening to the German voices closing in, knowing that he had led 300 men into a slaughter for nothing. He was captured hours later by a German patrol. Of the 300 men who went on the raid, 32 were killed. Only 35 made it back to American lines. The rest, including Baum, were captured. All the tanks were destroyed. All the half-tracks were lost. The prisoners of Oflag XIII-B were marched back into captivity. John Waters was treated by a Serbian doctor and survived, but remained a prisoner until the camp was liberated by the 14th Armored Division 9 days later. 9 days. If Patton had just waited 9 days, everyone would have been safe without firing a shot. The aftermath was a political nightmare. When the news of the disaster reached 3rd Army headquarters, Patton was furious. But he wasn't furious at himself. He was furious that the raid had failed. He realized immediately that this could ruin him. If the press found out he had wasted 300 men on a personal rescue mission, his career might be over. So, the cover-up began. Patton tried to spin the narrative. He claimed in his diary and official reports that the raid had distracted the Germans, that it had drawn off enemy reserves that would have been used to stop the Third Army's advance. This was a lie. Historical analysis shows that the Germans crushed Task Force Baum with local reserve units. It hadn't affected their strategic disposition at all. Patton then ordered a media blackout. He forbade his staff from discussing the raid with reporters. He classified the after-action reports. He didn't want the press asking why he had sent a task force to a POW camp 60 miles away. He knew his enemies in Washington, and even Eisenhower, would see it for what it was, nepotism paid for in blood. But you can't hide 300 missing men. The rumors started to circulate. The families of the men who died began to ask questions. Where is my son? How did a whole task force disappear? Eisenhower eventually found out. He was livid. He summoned Patton. The meeting was private, but sources say Eisenhower dressed Patton down more severely than he ever had before. He told Patton he had risked the integrity of the command for personal gain. But once again, Patton was too valuable. The war was in its final weeks. Patton was a hero to the American public. Eisenhower couldn't fire him without creating a massive scandal that would damage Allied morale. So, Eisenhower helped bury it. The incident became a footnote. The official history of the U.S. Army notes the raid but glosses over the personal motivation. It wasn't until years later that the full truth came out. Patton wrote in his diary later, admitting, "I can say this, that throughout the campaign in Europe I know of no error I made except that of failing to send a combat command to take Hammelburg." Notice the wording. Even in his private diary, he couldn't admit he was wrong to send the mission. He only regretted not sending a larger force. He regretted not sending more men to die for his family favor. The fate of Captain Abraham Baum adds a final, bitter layer to the story. Baum spent the rest of the war in a prison camp, suffering from his wounds. When he was finally liberated, Patton summoned him. The meeting was awkward. Patton stood there, the great general, looking at the young captain whose unit he had destroyed. Patton pinned a Distinguished Service Cross on Baum. He told him he had done a hell of a job. He tried to joke with him. But Baum knew the truth. He knew he had been a pawn. He knew his men were dead because Patton wanted to play hero for his daughter. Years later, Baum would say in an interview, "I thought he was nuts. I thought the whole idea was nuts. But you don't tell a 3-star general his nuts." The Hammelburg Raid remains the dark stain on Patton's shiny legacy. We love the stories of old blood and guts slapping soldiers, of him pissing in the Rhine, of his speeches about Greece and tanks. We love the hero. But the Hammelburg Raid shows us the human. The flawed, arrogant, desperate human who thought the rules of war didn't apply to him. It shows us that even the greatest generals can make catastrophic mistakes when they let their hearts rule their heads. 32 men died in the mud of Germany not for freedom, not for their country, but because a father wanted to impress his daughter. That is the declassified truth of Task Force Baum. That is the battle Patton tried to erase. And that is why, in the study of war, we must always look past the medals and the speeches to see the cost paid by the men on the ground. The legacy of Task Force Baum is not one of glory, but of warning. It serves as a reminder that in war, the line between bold leadership and reckless ego is razor thin. And sometimes, the price of crossing that line is paid by the soldiers, who have no choice but to follow orders. Patton died in a car accident in December 1945, never having to publicly answer for Hammelburg. John Waters survived and went on to become a general himself. Abraham Baum lived to be an old man, carrying the shrapnel and the memories of his lost men. And the 32 soldiers who died. They lie in American cemeteries in Europe, the silent witnesses to the general's secret mistake.